Last year, I made a video telling you why the A7 II was a great camera in 2020. Now this year, I'm here to tell you once again that it's still a great camera in 2021. I'm talking about the A7 II, not the 3, the 2. That came out in 2014, and in camera body years, that's kind of ancient, but it's still a great camera. Now, who is this camera for? This is a great camera if you're a beginner photographer looking to develop your skills, or you're a newish photographer, maybe started in the last 1 to 3 years even. You're looking to upgrade to get your first mirrorless camera. Now, you also don't want to break the bank, right? Because these mirrorless cameras these days are pretty expensive. And speaking of expensive, of course, we're in a very expensive hobby, but let's talk about budget a little bit. Now there are a lot of cameras on the market right now, especially mirrorless cameras, but there's a reason that the A7 II is still on store shelves since 2014. It's because it offers great features for the price. Now the newer mirrorless models are like $2,000 or $3,000 more than the A7 II, and that's a lot of money. And I would say if you're a new photographer or relatively newish photographer, do not go spending that much money on a camera at the moment. If you spend less money on a camera body, you'll be able to spend more money on lenses, which if you talk to any photographer, it's a lot more important to spend money on good glass because lenses will retain their value a lot longer than bodies will. All right, let's talk about some of the features that still hold up really well today in 2021. First off, it's a full frame camera. You'll be very hard pressed to find a camera for around $1,000 usually that's full frame. The only other camera I can think of that's full frame is the EOS RP by Canon. That I'll make a little bit of a comparison to that camera later on. Second thing, sharpness. This camera is, simply put, very sharp. It's a 24 megapixel sensor, which is great if you want to crop in a little bit after you shoot, if say you find that your shot was a bit too far away from your subject, and it's a sharp sensor. Sony was way ahead of their time when they created the A7 II back in 2014, so I have no complaints there. Third, which also has to do with the sensor, is the video resolution. Now, it does only shoot in 1080p, not in 4K, but you don't really need 4K as a new filmmaker, you know? I wouldn't worry too much about shooting in 4K yet until you start doing some pro work, and by then you'll be making enough money to buy a pro level camera. Okay, now I'm gonna show you the most amazing thing about this camera. Now, without a doubt, the most impressive capability this camera has is the ability to recover shadows in low light situations. It's even better than this EOS R. Let me show you. So guys, I am still amazed to this day how well you can recover shadows with this camera. It even beats my 2-year-old EOS R. This camera from 2014 still beats my 2-year-old EOS R. Here, take a look, I'll show you. So what I'm gonna do right now is lower the aperture, crank it down to like f11 or something, and really crank up the shutter speed here because the sun is very bright and I kind of want to expose for the sky. So I'm gonna take a shot. Here's what it looks like. As you can see, the boat is super dark, but the sky is properly exposed. Now in Lightroom, what we can do is just bring up the shadows of this boat. No problem at all. This would be a lot harder on my EOS R, to be honest. With the A7 II, I'm really never scared of underexposing a shot. Okay, so before I move on to talk about stabilization and some great video features, I just want to pause for a quick second and ask you to jump down and hit that like button for me. All I want is to spread this video out to more people who are trying to make this rather pretty important decision actually in their life. I mean, you're spending $1,000. It's a big decision to buy a camera. So I just want to help these people. If you could hit that like button, it'll help me jump up in search rankings and get out to more people who, like you, are thinking about making this big purchase. And also head over to my Instagram. I take a lot of creative portraits over there, so if you're looking for some kind of inspiration on self-portraits or portraits for others, I would love to have you over there. Like I said, the A7 II was way ahead of its time back then in 2014. Sony put IBIS in the camera. IBIS stands for in-body image stabilization, by the way. And what it'll do is stabilize those hand jitters. It's not gonna stabilize like crazy movements or anything. It's not gonna create gimbal shots, but it will stabilize hand jitters. I'll show you what that means. This is handheld footage from the A7 II with a 50mm 1.8 lens. This lens, by the way, is not stabilized, so I'm just using the internal camera stabilization. If you don't have a lens that's stabilized, then the in-body stabilization comes into play and essentially stabilizes that lens for you. Now that's pretty cool. Now we're talking
slow motion.
So the A7 II shoots video at 60 frames per second. Now, it doesn't shoot at 120 frames per second, but you're gonna have to pay a lot more money for a newer camera to get that feature. And that back there, that was shot in 60 frames per second. Personally, I think 120 frames per second is often way too slow. Like, you need very fast subjects. 60 frames per second is great for most applications, mostly like people running, animals running, you know, water moving. Like 60 frames per second is usually perfect for that stuff. Now here's something that I didn't mention in last year's video. The A7 II has video profiles, including log. Now there aren't a lot of full frame cameras around $1,000 that give you a log profile to use in video. If you don't know what log is, that's totally fine. At least you know that the A7 II gives you something to grow into when you're ready to take the next step in your video making, filmmaking life, right? When you're ready to learn about video profiles, which are also called gamma curves, they're there for you. You've probably noticed all the snow around here. It's getting kind of cold, so let's go back inside. We do have to talk about the competition now. The closest competitor, I would say, to the A7 II is the Canon EOS RP. Now that camera is $1,000 also, but it's a lot newer. So the thing is, what features does the RP have over the A7 II, and why are they around the same price? Well, I will say that, like I said before, the RP doesn't have IBIS, it doesn't have in-body image stabilization, and it doesn't have log. Also, we really have to mention the screens. The EOS RP has a flip screen, a flip forward screen. So if you really want to vlog, then I would suggest the RP. But the A7 II has this flip up screen, right? So it only flips up and it flips sort of downwards like this, but I sort of miss the simplicity of simply flipping up the screen when you're doing a low angle shot. It makes a little bit of a difference when you're trying to capture a moment as quickly as possible, right? Now, what we should talk about is a couple of the things that you will be getting if you spend a little bit more money on a camera body like the A7 III. The first thing is you'll be getting better continuous autofocus. Now, the single autofocus on this camera is totally acceptable, it's great, but the continuous autofocus and continuous eye autofocus, more specifically, is going to be a lot better on newer cameras. The other thing is higher video frame rate. I talked about that before. You'll be getting 120 frames per second or even 240 frames per second if you spend a lot more money on a new camera body. And also, even within the Sony world, you'll be getting a little bit better color reproduction. Now, I'm not going to say that the color reproduction is bad on this camera, but it's been improved over time with the newer cameras. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is, are these features worth paying an extra $1,000, $2,000, or even $3,000 for? That's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. Head down, hit that like button, and subscribe with the notification bell to see my future videos. I really appreciate you watching and sticking around. So yeah, I'll catch you on the flip side. Peace.